Oh, this week, oh my gosh, I was digging through so many books and so many things, and here I found something. This is from the historian Gary Dorian, who wrote like 3-volume set about liberal religion in America, and he grabbed this section of Theodore Parker, who was a Unitarian minister. In 1842, Theodore Parker wrote, "A Christ outside of man is nothing." He's getting to true Christianity is not about the death or divinity of Christ, but about the death of sin and a life of holy goodness in our heart. He said, "Each man must be his own Christ or he is no Christian." Man, that's what happens when you read. And this morning's sermon is really, really motivated by this person. I saw Dr. Anthony Pinn speak at a General Assembly a couple years back, and as he was speaking, my jaw is just dropping. I'm like, and I didn't get to run up to him and talk to him right then, so I had to email him. I said, "Oh my God, tell me more about this." He said, "Just go read my book." I got his book. I wish I could say, "Oh, you've got to read it. It's so wonderful. It's so it's not accessible. It's dense, and but it's." I had to read him. I had to listen to him because he's an African American atheist, and I figured I can learn something. So here we go. Much of what I'm going to say this morning is going to fly completely against everything that we've ever been taught to expect about what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist. This morning, I'm going to suggest that social activism can just wait. You really can't change anything but yourself. So just quit running around trying to save the world. Not what you'd expect from a UU minister, right? I mean, we're all about social justice. We're the descendants of abolitionists and freedom riders, and we marched in Selma, and we're standing on the side of love, except right now we are answering the call of love because standing is inherently ableist language, and we want to try and be inclusive of everybody. That's us. Social justice is in our DNA. So let's go take a look first at how it got there. It's left over from our Christian heritage. Because despite our Calvinist roots, it says everybody's already predestined, somehow we wound up with this optimistic notion that people could be perfected. In fact, the whole society could be perfected, or at least made less awful. And here's an interesting example of this thinking. It's a loop. Christianity would create the more perfect man, and the more perfect man would create the more perfect society, which would uphold Christianity, and it goes round. And what strikes me about that is how American that is. It's just so optimistic. But this morning, I'm going to suggest that a person might actually do better to just quit trying to improve the outward world by doing good, and for a while at least simply work at being good. And this is not some little simple word game I'm playing. I'm really going to suggest that the most profound way that you can change the world is by spending time with yourself for a while. Okay? And I'm not so naive as to think that if you simply work at being a most perfect you, that the waves of perfection are going to radiate out and just sort of change the world. No. But you need to start there, okay? That's what Henry David Thoreau did, right? He built a cabin alongside Walden Pond. He planted beans in a garden. He ate a woodchuck that was eating his beans. He decided woodchuck didn't taste so good. He took walks. He wrote in his journal. And eventually he published his writing to modest acclaim. And nowadays some folks are criticizing him as simply being a privileged romantic I mean, well, it's easy for you to just go walk out and live in the woods for 2 years. So they like to point out the fact that he actually did go home most days and have dinner at his mom's house. It's really easy to criticize anything from a distance. But others are looking at his work, and they're seeing that the time out in the woods, outside of Concord, actually shaped and sharpened his ability to criticize the society that he had stepped away from. Historians are taking a closer look, and they're pointing out that those woods were not completely uninhabited. He was not by himself. There were other people living in those woods, too. African American people who had been enslaved were living out there. They were technically freed, but they were still marginalized. They were still being othered by the white society of Concord. These freed people were pushed out to the edges where the soil was poor, where they could be unseen, where their darker bodies would be less likely to disrupt the social patterns of whiteness. There were also Irish immigrants who, by their poverty, by their class, were not seen as fully white. They lived there in the woods, on the margins. Thoreau got to know his neighbors. That question, who is my neighbor? He got to know them better than if he had just simply stayed in town. So even though when people first read him, they begin to think of him as a hermit, Thoreau was not alone out there. And when he did return to town, he began writing on civil disobedience. He began writing against slavery in Massachusetts, which leaves a reader to wonder if his experience in the woods, his proximity to othered people, might have shifted something inside of him. This is what I mean about the work of being good. Thoreau understood that the unexamined parts of ourselves can unconsciously contribute to or even perpetuate injustice. The reason for spending time looking inward is so that when we do go out into the world, we will be more able to truly work for justice rather than simply operating from a place of self-aggrandizement disguised as concern for others. That's a lot of time. Okay. What does this mean for us right here, right now in the Panhandle? What does this mean? Everybody take a deep breath, because here we go. Right now, we are in the midst of another social rights era, civil rights era. It's not being labeled as such. It's another movement, but it's not being labeled as such because labels always come later as we look back on events. But right now, we are in the midst of examining our legacy and the systems of our country's history of racism. Now, some of us who've been down this road a few times, some of us are saddened and we are weary because we'd hoped that we had made some serious progress the last time we took this work up. We worked so hard to put laws into place to prevent discrimination, and we worked to give at least 2 whole generations of people the chance to grow up with what we hoped would be equal opportunities. And yet, here we are, again, because it never really went away. So, again, we have earnest people out there marching and weeping and yelling and calling names, and we have many, many good people who are just sitting inside, tisk-tisking, and just wishing that everyone could be nice and get along. But here are some of the differences about our current era, because this time we have some new ideas, some new words. We have some new ways of attacking this old challenge. What used to be called consciousness raising is now being called getting woke and staying woke. As in, it's about time we woke up to what's going on. Don't go back asleep. And we also have the new term of privilege, which tends to make people very uncomfortable at first, which is good. But mercifully, we also have the concept of intersectionality, which helps explain how a person can have privilege and still experience oppression. Okay? And this time around, the young people of color are really, really uninterested in helping white people feel more comfortable. Okay? Oh dear. How can we address this and just make people be nice to each other and quit being afraid of each other? Maybe I should sign a petition. Can I send some money somewhere? Can I just go be very nice to people who are different from me? I'll just be really nice. I could fix things for them. Maybe I can make things better for those people over there. Uh-oh. Because anytime I start wanting to help or fix another person's situation, I might be coming from a place presuming that I know what they would like or need, and sometimes without even fully asking or listening to what they are saying. It can so easily seem like any step has the potential of being a misstep, and I hate making mistakes. Okay, pivot. Here's a story. Once upon a time, there was a boy growing up in a small town in Texas. He was on the football team. He was white. In the same school, there was a cute girl who had skin that was a little bit darker, tawny brown. She was bright and bubbly, and they smiled at each other in the hallway. It was fall. And the cheerleaders, all white, were selling football mums for the homecoming game. And I know you all know what a football mum is. I don't have to explain that, right? Okay. The brown-skinned girl went up with her money and asked to order a mum. When the cheerleaders asked which team number she wanted, she said, number 29. And she blushed a little bit. That was the number on the white boy's jersey. They weren't even dating. She just wanted to show her support of him. Well, that didn't turn out so well. There was some yelling, and her order was torn up. And both the white boy and the brown girl were told that such a thing was not acceptable. Just talking about wearing a football mum with his number on it. But that was that. They never even dared to go out on a date together. They grew up. They moved away into different lives. This was back in the 1970s, but, it could have been the 1950s. It could have been the 1990s because, Texas. Now, at first, you might think that it was the brown girl who suffered the most. But I'll tell you that I know that the white boy also suffered. And if I'm truly filled with grace, I will even say that the white cheerleaders were suffering too. But that boy suffered because he was told that he could not even consider the affections or support of a person with darker skin than his. He was told, and it was shown to him, that his whole potential was being circumscribed and twisted by racism. He was being made complicit in a display of blatant racism that left him confused and ashamed of the people he came from, but he couldn't confront them or argue with them, so he just shut away his feelings. Now, if I'm truly filled with grace and compassion, I might even consider that some of the white cheerleaders in time look back at that moment with sadness. Or not. It was about 20 years later that white boy, now a man, could go safely inward and look at that moment, unpack the fullness, and adequately acknowledge his grief and anger. But when he did, it freed him up to finally speak out. Because at that point, he could see how the racism wasn't just something that hurt others, it had hurt him. And he despised the complicity that he had been part of. I'm telling you this because I want us to acknowledge how each of us has been twisted and circumscribed, our potential blunted by the systemic racism of our society. Each of us has suffered from the indignity that comes from denying another person's dignity. And I know this because we are in the panhandle of Texas. I know this. And this suffering can cause us to shut down, withdraw, become very apologetic or defensive. So, as we are muddling through this current era of civil rights work, as we're wondering, what do I do? Perhaps this is a good time to just step back and look inward for a little while. What if I take a page from Thoreau, and instead of just running around yelling about racial bias, what if I first start by looking at my own experiences, my own beliefs, and I begin to work on this in the privacy of my own being. The work of getting woke and staying woke is an internal process, and it's not always easy, and it's certainly never convenient, and I might not be very good company for a while. It might be better for me to just stomp off into the woods, metaphorically. I'm not leaving. And look at the ways that I was raised to internalize racism. Look at how my life was lived predicated on prejudice, and how I might have struggled to make sense of the absolute nonsense that is racial bias. If I'm thorough, I might even see how my own life's work was compromised by racism, how I might have complicitly or unintentionally failed my ancestors and my descendants by not acknowledging the complexity and complicity of my own multiracial family. Truly, trust me, being multiracial does not make this any easier. Like I said, this is my own work, and it's not particularly attractive or pretty. But as I do it, as I unpack, I'm getting better at being my better self. I get better at being a good me. As I get better at being a good me, I find that it's actually easier to do good things for the larger community. I still make missteps, but fewer, because I know myself better. And now I can hold the world with greater empathy. Okay, here comes the now what. Right, we have the what, the so what, the now what. Take a deep breath. May I extend an invitation? Okay, a challenge. Before you go out and do something to make the world better, try just not doing first. Go inward and examine those parts of yourself that might have been made complicit, parts of yourself that were twisted by the prevailing winds of racism, twisted like a tree, hanging on to rocks, still growing, but twisted. If you identify as white, don't go ask a person of color to help you feel better. I'm going to suggest you go find another brave person who identifies as being white to go and work with you. The good news is there's a whole room full of them right here. And this is our work. I invite you to start this work and have these courageous conversations because you love yourself. You love your life. You love this world. And as you get better at being good, being uncomfortable, I trust that you will be the right person to change this world. May it be so, and blessed be.